Man to Men is for men like me. I'm Cameron Church, a financial planner from Charlotte, North Carolina, where I live with my wife, Haley. I hope you enjoyed this episode.
This is Man to Men, the audio journal for Christian men living faithfully and leading courageously. I'm Jared Musgrove, and I want to welcome you to our Live Faithfully segments. These are shorter episodes where we're going to devote time in your day and in mine to diving into a particular section or a theme of Scripture, giving all of us the chance to listen personally, wherever it is you're listening, while you're driving, maybe getting ready for the day, maybe you're working out, maybe you're getting some yard work done around the weekend. But you can listen personally, and we want to lead you into meaningful discussions with your cell groups, your men's groups, or just friends gathered around a fire, or those with whom you're sharing the gospel. These are conversational, hopefully leading you to a deeper conversation with God and with one another. We're starting this season in a section of Psalms called the Psalms of Ascent, and they're named that way because they were sung by ancient Hebrews who were going up, ascending, to worship God together in the temple in Jerusalem. They're collected in our Bible as Psalms 120 through 134. So there's about 15 of them, and there's these very human songs for a walk with God and with one another. This is a life lived with God in his community. You're going to see a lot of real life in these Psalms. They remind us of our journey home. And it's not a journey devoid of perils or even dangers. Definitely has a lot of past hurts, some high emotions, some anxieties, plenty of frustration, and great joy with God and one another. In this, your life is not so unlike these ancient Hebrews who first sang these songs together on their journey to worship God in Jerusalem. These Psalms of Ascent are generally held to be sung and prayed together by those travelers who were on their way up to the temple to celebrate three festivals of the Hebrew people. That is Passover, Pentecost, and the Feast of Booths. You can find more background on this in Exodus 23. And Jerusalem was not only the topographic height, but a spiritual high point of worshiping the one true God as an ancient Hebrew. These Psalms of Ascent, again, Psalms 120 through 134, were the soundtrack of these pilgrims. This was a playlist from the past. It's also one for our present and our future together as God's people. I think you'll see much of yourself in these lyrics: loss, confusion, hard work, enjoyment, family, friendship, questions about God, assertions about God, and everything the soul experiences in between. There are few other collections within the Scriptures that attest more fully to your life with God and one another than these Psalms. A main theme that we'll have on repeat and we'll see in these Psalms over the time together is going to be looking at God's acts in our own past to cause praise and gratitude in the present and prayer for the future. Let me say that again. We're going to be looking to God's acts in our own past to cause praise and gratitude in the present and prayer for the future. These are ultimately songs sung in community. They should be for us as well. It's not walking alone with God. He's given us one another on the journey. Men, may the Lord bless and keep you and your group as you begin your own shared ascent to worship him with these sacred words. Ever true. Let's get into it. I'm going to be reading and interacting with several English translations of the Bible. That's something that I enjoy doing for the majority of our Live Faithfully segments together. I'm typically going to begin reading from the English Standard Version. I'll read the whole psalm. Then as I kind of talk through each part of the psalm, I'll probably rephrase it from the Christian Standard Bible. But then you're also going to hear me use a lot of commentary and insight and even some of the translation of Robert Alter. This is a man who has studied the Hebrew Bible for decades and has published in recent years a magisterial translation of the Hebrew Bible, our Old Testament, and it includes these Psalms of Ascent. So you're going to hear me go back and forth. But for now, this is our reading of Psalm 120 from the English Standard Version. In my distress, I called to the Lord, and he answered me. Deliver me, O Lord, from lying lips, from a deceitful tongue. What shall be given to you? What more shall be done to you, you deceitful tongue? A warrior's sharp arrows with glowing coals from the broom tree. Woe to me that I sojourn in Meshech, that I dwell among the tents of Kedar. Too long have I had my dwelling among those who hate peace. I am for peace, but when I speak, they are for war. There's a lot going on here. This is not exactly the happy, peppy psalm you would think would start out this road trip of these pilgrims going up to worship the Lord God together in Jerusalem. And that's because they're not together. Not at first, at least not this guy. This man is crying out to God. The first verse, in my distress, I called to the Lord and he answered me. We call them often gradual psalms or psalms of ascent because they follow a gradual journey. Originally, these songs of ascent are believed to have been composed, collected, and sung as fellow travelers made their way up to Jerusalem. We've covered that. They joined together to travel a great distance and pilgrimage together, walking across the desert, singing the very songs collected in this part of the Psalms. But the journey for this man, and maybe for a lot of us as we begin walking with God, or maybe we've been walking with him for a while, and we can relate to some of what he sings because the journey for him starts at rock bottom. This man in Psalm 120 is a real man like us, likely not a sage-like chief priest. He's got blood and temptations pulsing through his veins, and at this point, he's stressed, he's tired, he's angry, he's bored, and he's stinging from the world's way of turning every community into a splinter group. Sound familiar? This man's been hurt deeply, and he's crying out to God. And if we're honest, we have those kinds of hurts too. It reads that this man is in distress. The original Hebrew carries with it a sense of dire straits or being put under pressure like in a pressure cooker. What's happened to him has upended his entire life. What's been done to him and what he's going to do about it, well, we're going to learn more from these Psalms of Ascent. His dire straits, though, it's important to recognize, don't start out with a complaint. We'll get there, but he calls out to God first. And again, this isn't some high, holy man who's disconnected with real life. He's covered in dirt and sweat and loss and hurt from some harsh words. And he decides to talk to God first. In my distress, I called to the Lord and he answered me. He talks to God first and God answers. What does he say to God? He says, Lord, rescue me from lying lips and a deceitful tongue. We find out exactly why he's in such distressed straits. He's been the target of malicious slander. Hurtful words to him and about him have cut him to the core. Notice what he moves to immediately, prayer. But that doesn't mean he isn't feeling gutted. In fact, he's being more honest about it than some of us tend to be. You've heard the old adage, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I love the intent of that saying. It's just not true. Words are often the most hurtful. Most of the time, it's not words from people we don't know or who don't know us. That we can usually absorb and keep going. And maybe that's what the old adage above is talking about. But the words that pierce bone and burn into our hearts are the word arrows from the people we trust or trusted most in the world. We all have them. Be it words from a parent, a coach, a mentor, or yes, it could have even been a pastor or spiritual leader in your life. Men, not one of us is immune from hurtful words. That's why the psalmist is asking to be rescued from them. And we have to deal with these hurtful words in our life. We have to deal with them out in the open with God and with one another. The power of the tongue is well documented in the Bible. It can cut and it can heal. The man goes on and he talks about in Psalm 120, he says, what will he give you and what will he do to you, you deceitful tongue? He's addressing these hurtful words and perhaps those who said the hurtful words, who slandered him. He says they're like a warrior's sharp arrows with burning charcoal. He's rehearsed why he's in distress. It's because of these hurtful words. Another translation may be helpful here. This is from Robert Alter. It says, what can it give you? What can it add? A tongue of deceit, a warrior's sharp arrows and burning charcoal. A warrior's sharp arrows usually land with great effect. That's the word picture for malicious speech, for hurtful words in our lives. Burning charcoal here is the image of glowing coals from the broom tree. Broomwood burns for a very long time. Even after the surface of the coals turns to ash, it retains heat for a long time. This is the picture of what the man or the persons causing trouble with deceitful tongues deserves. That's the wound and the smoldering ember. Now, the New Testament letter of James carries on with his burning imagery in regard to the tongue. And we can relate to some of that too. This man is not in a great place. He's saying something has to change because he keeps saying to God, what misery that I have stayed in Meshech, that I have lived among the tents of Kedar. I have dwelt too long with those who hate peace. He's at a turning point. It's time to make a decision. A turning point is a decision, an event, a person, an episode, or an experience that turned the direction of your life from where you were going to a different direction entirely. This is the man's turning point in Psalm 120. He realizes that he's not going in a good way, nor are the people around him. I think all of us arrive here at some stage in our journey. The man mentions Meshech and Kedar. These are actually two very different locations, pretty far flung from each other. Meshech to the far northwest in Asia Minor, and Kedar is the opposite direction in the southeast Arabian Peninsula. What's with the wide-ranging geography? Well, this man was likely not that well-traveled. Few, if any, people in his time were. The poetry, the effect, shows what it's like to live among strangers. It's like one of us saying an experience among our own family or friends. It's like us saying, I felt like they were speaking another language, or I felt like I'd been dropped off in a foreign country. Even though I've been with these people for a long time, most of my life, now they seem like strangers who just shot arrows at me. And those words hurt. They deeply wounded. This is the turning point moment. He says he has dwelt too long with those who hate peace. It's not a simple decision for him. It never is. He lived with this community his entire life. Now it's time for a change. And we all have these turning points. A degree earned or not. Marriage or the ending of a marriage. The birth or the loss of a child. The death of a loved one. Gaining a job. Losing a job. A trust earned. A hurtful betrayal. Salvation in Jesus Christ is such a turning point, and such events are not impersonal forces. They profoundly impact the course of a life, just like it did for this man. He says, I'm for peace. But when they speak, they are for war. The final difference becomes clear and makes the man's decision to sojourn away. He's a man of peace, but he lives among a people who are at war with one another. There has to be a change. It's come to this point. Words are weapons of war, as he calls them, piercing arrows, burning coals, the most personal kind. The end of this psalm brings to mind Romans 12:18. If possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. That becomes much harder with those who's verbally berated and misrepresented you. A community you trusted is no longer trustworthy. That's what this man is experiencing. I think many of us have been there, or we're going to be there someday. Live long enough as a man and you'll experience such betrayal. I'm not trying to be a downer. I'm just trying to be real. This side of heaven, it's an all too human experience. But what are we to do, men? First off, know that you're not the first. There is a path. Hurtful words don't have to turn into ungodly self-talk. And these psalms are a place to process with people who've been through what you're facing. They can start the path to peace in your soul and strength. Paul's words let us know in Romans 12 that peace between people is a two-way street. I think this man in Psalm 120 would resonate with that. Such moments can be turning points. They can be clarity. It's often in times of loneliness and confusion that true community can shine for the Christian believer, for you. And a new path can be forged. That is what we will see as the man joins up with the community traveling to worship God. He's not there yet, not in Psalm 120. And soon, some of that self-talk is going to cease. He's been talking to God and he's been talking to himself. Soon he's going to have other fellow believers to talk with. He's going to have someone to share with. That's our hope for these times together, for these Live Faithfully episodes, is that we are able to encapsulate out of the scriptures very human experiences that all of us as men go through, and to point to having a conversation with God and with one another, the men in your life. So let me give you some things to think about, maybe some questions to talk about in your group this week. What do you think about when you think about God? That can often be one of the most important things about us. We see this man under pressure in dire straits, and the first place he turns is to God. How does that affect you? Another thing that you may talk about is, how has that view of God shaped your relationship with God? How has it shaped your relationship with others? Here's a tough one. Who do you tend to have sharp words for? Why? Share among each other, men, a few phrases that you tend to say to yourself. It might even be in some of the spaces where you're listening to this podcast. It might be in the car as you're driving alone. It might be working out in the yard. It might be showering and shaving, getting ready in the morning. What are a few phrases you tend to say to yourself? And where's God in that? And then, if you men would be so courageous with one another, would you share with one another a few words that were said to you in your past that most impacted you? That's what we can discuss this week as we gather together with God and with one another. I'll admit, this psalm is not a sunny start. Salvation and walking in God's way most often starts with a conviction. Some of you can probably resonate with him because you have come to faith and recognize that you were not living among a people of faith. And you had to seek out a church family. You may have had to move. You may have had to have a hard conversation. There's an old way of life that this man lived in and among. He realized that he couldn't do it any longer. He used to feel a part of a community, and now he feels alone. The Psalms of Ascent are about a brotherhood and a unity among believers, but they begin with an absence of those things. Maybe that's an absence you felt too. This is a lament psalm. Lament talks honestly about how bad things are, but also sees God in it. Laments are past, present, and future focused. We've all had hard times where we can relate to this man's experience, but the only way forward is through. What does he do? He starts walking. And that's our prayer for you guys this week, that you would start walking with God and with one another. Maybe these Live Faithfully episodes can be some of that help to you. Looking forward to walking with you men even further in the Psalms of Ascent this season on Man to Men in our Live Faithfully episodes. Man to Men is a creation of Beta Upsilon Chi, the nation's largest Christian fraternity, commonly referred to as Bucks. You can find out more about Beta Upsilon Chi by transliterating our Greek letters and adding a .org. That's byx.org. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please consider supporting our work with college men across the country by clicking the individual partners link in the show notes. We are produced, rather well I might add, by the good gentlemen of the Good Podcast Company. Producer Bradley is at the helm over there. Until next time, I'm Dr. Jared Musgrove with Man to Men.